In that response, the UK government paid out a total of 20 million for its role in the slave trade. This figure represented a staggering 40% of the Treasury's annual spending budget, and in today's terms, that would equate to around about £16.5 billion. Experts have also calculated that the UK remains one of the largest global aid donors, with an annual budget of around about 11 billion. So where does it end? So for the great British debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time to end reparations? I'm joined in the studio by historian David Oldroyd-Bolt. David, OK, the UK has an annual budget of about 11 billion in foreign aid. Can we afford to be giving money away in this manner?
Well, if we break down that 11 billion, about 3 billion of it is spent on things like housing migrants here. So though it's part of the foreign aid budget, it's spent domestically. And then the rest, some of it goes to the World Bank, for instance, which I think is more than able to fund itself. And then we have our global aid programmes. We can't afford it, and we should not be giving money to countries like Pakistan and India, which are able to fund nuclear programmes. We certainly should not be giving money to countries we know to have an appalling record of human rights abuses, which we do at the moment. And it's interesting that we seem to forget in this country that there is an intellectual dissonance. Those people who say we should be giving more money abroad will say at the same time that we're a terribly poor country and we need to get used to being poor, and they would say that the only way to avert this is to join the European Union. So which do they think we are? Do they think we're rich enough to give away money to countries with nuclear programmes and appalling records on human rights abuses, or do we think we're a poor country and we should look after ourselves first? If you think about the West Africa Squadron, we, over the course of 60 years, saved the lives of 150,000 slaves, African slaves, at the cost of 17,000 British sailors' lives. Now, as was mentioned in the VT there, should the families of those people whose lives were lost at sea, protecting the lives of slaves, receive reparations themselves? Well, there's an argument for that. But I should generally say, as a rule, reparations needs to be used in a very specific context, and that is immediately post any kind of conflict. To think that it can go on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years is essentially to say that history is a constant cycle of never-ending recrimination. I don't believe in that. I don't think it's good for international relations. I don't think it's good for a nation's conception of itself, constantly to be looking backwards and trying to find places where we have harmed other people.
And also, how far back do you go? Because if you went all the way back, you'd find that mankind came from Africa. And then we've only got, well, me to blame, frankly. Stay right there, though, David, because I want to have a chat with historian Martyn Whittock. Martyn, what's your view then? Because of the Industrial Revolution, it started in Britain. Do you think that we should be held responsible for the climate, any potential climate damage that people may perceive might have been as a result of any of that?
I think there is a connection, an unintended connection, of course, between our development and the fact that climate change is disproportionately hitting certain countries today. I mean, nobody intended that, of course, but some of the poorest nations of the world are facing the severest impact of climate change as a result of industrial policies. Nobody intended that, of course, but those industrial policies have enriched the wealthiest nations of the world. And what led to our prosperity, I know there are issues now, and I very much recognise that, but overall, globally, what led to our prosperity is leading to a disproportionate experience of the effects of human-caused climate change for other countries. And I think this has to be met by a multinational response. It's not just a UK thing. I mean, nations like USA and China face huge responsibilities. And it's not just for the old emitters, it's the recently developed ones too. But I really do think that given the kind of crisis that many poorer nations are facing, we do need a Marshall Plan for climate change. Of course, the Marshall Plan was that hugely generous plan that the USA paid in the aftermath of the Second World War to get Europe back on its feet after the catastrophe of the World War. So, yes, I do think that we do need to target and work with poorer nations because we've benefited from much of the technological advantage that is now to their disadvantage.
So on that theme, so what about things like, for example, the spinning jenny, the locomotive, all the things that, say, this country created and invented that were of benefit to others? Is there no sort of kickback to look at, actually, we are a net benefit? Because some of the things that we've used, whilst we may have initially emitted a lot of carbon, China are emitting a lot and others are emitting, places like Brazil and the Amazon, they're chopping down the rainforest, so they're taking away carbon. If we go down that road, we kind of find ourselves on a very shady path. Surely.
It certainly is complicated, and I'm not for a moment saying that the only contribution of the UK, to world development is negative. That would be absolutely false and just plain wrong. But what I am saying is that a great deal of the economic change that has happened since 1750, for example, 1800, we now know is having a disproportionate effect on the climate. And we're actually saying to other countries, you mustn't develop because it will actually add to a problem that we've caused. But I think this isn't just a moral issue, and obviously we didn't mean to cause it. This isn't just a moral issue. I think it is also one of self-interest too.
Can I bring David
the kinds
in
of
on this?
movements of people that's challenging us now will be dwarfed by what is to come if these poorer nations implode under the weight of climate change caused crisis. So I think for the good of all of us, we have to act in this area.
David, your view on that?
Well, it's fine to say that we bear an historic responsibility. We do, but the scale of that is minuscule. Compared, if you want to think about the Industrial Revolution, the actual emittance of carbon for which we are responsible was minuscule. And let's think about it. Who are the biggest emitters of carbon in the world now? China, the USA, Russia, India. And they are going to contribute, if you just take 1 year, they contribute more than we did in a decade. So who should be contributing here and in what proportion? But the realistic point is that none of these large emitters are going to be brought to the table. None of them are going to take part, for instance, they didn't take part in COP27. None of them are going to take part in the system of global reparations. So yet again, it comes down to the UK and other Western European nations who are essentially soft touchers to these plans, well-meaning plans but misguided plans, who will, with much smaller budgets and with much lower responsibility for what is quite rightly conceived to be a difficult and globally pressing issue, it is those people who will be asked to pay the bill. Now, if some magic person can get Brazil, Russia, India, China, the US, Canada, Australia to the table on this, then I would say there's a conversation to be had. But at the moment, it's pure flagellation of the UK.